I just finished sharpening some chisels and I figured this would be a great time to finally do a video on these Japanese waterstones. Now these are all made by, or I believe they're made by Naniwa, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, so right there is the correct spelling, because I'm sure I'm butchering it. Although all these other stones have Skerpper written on them, which I believe is a different brand, but I assume all these stones to be made in the same factory. Now this video really is just a This video really is a 3-in-1, because I've actually got 3 different sets here. From here to here, and that stone at the back, including this sole here, is all a set. And I paid about £150 for this set about 3 years ago from Knives and Tools. This is a separate stone which I paid £50 for by itself. This is an 8000 grit. This isn't even a sharpening stone, this is a polishing stone. And I've also got here in the sink a 220 grit flattening stone, which I think I paid about £30 for. And this is essential. I would recommend getting one of these sooner rather than later. Now, before I get into any of that, if you're new to sharpening knives or chisels, or any sort of tool actually, I recommend you avoid something like this to begin with. If you've never done it before, there is a bit of a technique to it. It's not difficult, it shouldn't take you that long. You just have to be reasonably patient, and so long as you keep a consistent angle. Plenty of videos on YouTube to show you how to do this. There's my neighbour making a racket. I've tried to do sharpening videos and I'm not really satisfied with them, so we'll have to wait and see on that regard. But if you're brand new to sharpening, I recommend you do 2 things. 1, do not use your favourite knife or your best knife or your favourite chisel or plane. I recommend you start off on a really cheap chisel or a really cheap knife with a really cheap stone like this Blue Sun, which I paid about £20 on Amazon for, and this is a combination stone, and they offer a few varieties of this. This particular one is a 600 grit and a 2000 grit. Now this stone is a lot softer, it's made in China, not Japan. It's nowhere near as high quality, but it'll get you started off. Don't think you need to spend a lot of money on Japanese waterstones to get a nice edge, because you don't. This did it for me for quite a while. Now, for me, I've been sharpening pretty much everything on these stones. As a woodworker and as a knife collector, sharpness is very important to me. Whether I'm cutting dovetails, mortise and tenon, or I just need my favourite pocket knife to be sharp, a good quality set of stones, in my opinion, is absolutely essential. Now, if you only have 1 or 2 Swiss Army knives that you want to keep sharp, this is absolutely pointless for you. If you do have a bunch of knives, or you have higher quality knives, or you're a woodworker and you need to sharpen tools regularly, then it would make sense to get this. But if you've only got 1 or 2 knives to sharpen, I wouldn't bother at all. And I'm just going to be brutally honest, you do not need to spend £700 on those silly sharpening systems that have all those little, I don't even know how to describe them, but those really expensive sharpening systems is completely not necessary. You absolutely can do it by hand, freehand I should add, on a set of stones. It's a lot easier to use a guide, but it's totally not necessary, and it's a lot easier than you think to do on this, and it's a lot less expensive. Like I said, £150 for the lot, and you'll get a shaving sharp edge. Might not be quite as consistent. Anyway, let's get all that aside. Sorry, I forgot to mention what sort of things am I sharpening on these stones. For me, I'm sharpening things like pocket knives, fixed blades, machetes, axes, bevel edge chisels, plain irons, things like that. For me, I sharpen all these things on just these stones. No reason you can't, and I have. In fact, I've even sharpened a butter knife using this set of stones, and I did get said butter knife sharp. Yeah, it took a lot of time and patience, but I did it 100% by hand, no power at all, no guides, just freehand on these stones, so it can be done. So what do you get for the £150 from Knives and Tools? Well, as I said, you get this shoe, which holds the stone in place, keeps it relatively secure, stops it sliding. So this is basically just 2 steel threaded rods with 3 rubber feet, essentially, to stop the stone sliding. A 220 grit, a 1000 grit, a 2000 grit, and a 5000 grit. And we'll get to this stone shortly. And this one at the back here, I would call a cleaning stone, just to get the crap off these stones. because you do need to maintain them. And this is also a 220, and it should be used on all of these stones. Now I really wouldn't call this a sharpening stone. This is more of a grinding stone. If you have a really beat up edge, or you want to establish a brand new edge, I would go to this stone first. Because if you've got a really crappy edge, it makes no sense to go straight to 2000, for example. You'll be there forever and you'll get nothing done. You'll polish it, yes, but you won't remove much material. The lower the grit, the more material you will remove. The higher the grit, the more of a polish it is, until you eventually get a mirror-like polish like this. So for example, that 220 grit, here is an old chisel which I need to clean up and bring back to life, which I look forward to doing. You can see there that edge is in really bad shape. So you would start on this stone, get a nice established edge, move to this stone, then this stone. Now, these being water stones, they're quite soft, so it is easy to gouge them. In fact, I've gouged these stones many times. Thankfully, it's not been too bad. I think this one actually might have a gouge mark somewhere. Oh, you can see the remnants of a gouge mark. And I have chipped little bits off just by placing. Now, these are really, really fragile. Even though they're stone, they're not real stone, they're synthetic. It's not like they're cut out of a quarry, they're not from the ground, it's a man-made stone. These are quite brittle. I've never dropped one, but I would imagine if I was to drop one even from this sort of height, it would probably snap in half. So I'd recommend you be very careful with them. It does actually tell you the grit on the side somewhere. See, 5,000 there. Now with these stones, the 2000 even starts to give you a nice edge and a mirror polish, which is excellent. Now I'm just going to briefly show you this 8000. It's still a little bit wet because I've just been using it. This is an 8000, as you can see there. This was £50 by itself, and the higher the grit, the more expensive the stone gets. So I think for me, the next stone I'll get is a 10,000 grit, and I think I'll be looking to pay about £70 for that. And then I'm eventually wanting to aim up to 16,000. Now, do you need all those stones and all that grit to get a nice workable edge? Absolutely not. I would say even just with these 5 stones alone, you can get a really nice working edge. But like I said, if you're new to sharpening, get a cheap Chinese stone and a cheap Chinese knife or chisel and practice on it, because there's no point ruining your favourite expensive pocket knife or your favourite chisel. Now these stones here are all significantly thicker than this, which I would have got a thicker stone if possible, but I couldn't find one. And I mean, more stone, more money, I suppose. These tend not to move. This one, however, while it's drying, it tends to bend. So it goes from straight to curved like that. In fact, if you put a ruler, I should have got a steel rule, but if you put a ruler against it, you will actually see that it is cupped, and that could put either a convex or a concave on your knife or tool, which is what you don't want. So, and I mean, of course, paying £50 for such a thing, you wouldn't be very happy. So I found that if I just put the flattening stone on top of it and just leave it for a few hours, it sort of sorts itself out, which is good. Now you could flatten it, but that's quite time consuming and you're just going to wear out the stone way quicker than it needs to. Speaking of flattening, it's absolutely essential that you periodically flatten it on something. You don't have to buy a flattening stone, but they're not that expensive. Like I said, I paid somewhere in the region of £30 to £50, I don't quite remember. You can just rub two stones that are reasonably similar grit together. So if you really wanted to, you could rub a 1000 and a 2000 together. I don't want to do that, because then you end up with 1500 grit, is what I've been told by people that know better than me. So that's something I wouldn't want to do. Alternatively, the cheapest option is just to get a piece of glass or a piece of tile that you know is flat, and just put a piece of sandpaper on and just soak it so it sticks. That works, but it rips and you just got to keep replacing it. So for me, the amount of times that I use this, absolutely worth the investment. This one here actually is cupped. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it does have convex in it. Now I'm not too upset by that because I have used this a lot. I am periodically flattening it. In fact, you might see there it's a lot thinner there in the middle than it is at the edges, and of course you want to try and work the whole stone as much as possible. Now I found that the stone that I use the least is the highest grit, so either the 5000 or the 8000. I don't always use the 8000 because it's not always necessary, but I've used this stone the least because, well, the previous stones do all the work. And as I said, periodically clean the crap off the stones with this smaller stone. Move these back for just now, and we'll briefly talk about this. Now again, I think this is absolutely worth the investment. I'll just put it there now. This is absolutely worth the investment. I paid either 30 or 50, I don't remember, but this is essential for keeping your other stones flat. Now this is advertised as 220 grit, and you're not supposed to use anything below 600, but I've flattened a 220 on it and it's been fine. It might have smoothed it out a bit more than it's supposed to, but it is working fine. Now you could use this stone either dry or wet. Usually you would have your stones wet. In fact, that's why these ones are called water stones, because you need to soak them in water. Now my understanding is there's two types of water stones. There's soak stones, which these are, and there's splash and go stones. The difference is, with these stones, you need to run the sink or some container and leave them in water for about 10 minutes. You'll see the water sort of fizz and bubble up. I think that's just the air escaping from the pores in these stones. And once that's stopped, I would say it's ready to use. I usually just put them in the sink, sit down for 10 minutes, come back and then start using it. But they do sort of lose their wetness quite quick on the surface, especially with this stone. I mean, it just soaks up water real quick. In fact, I'll just show you. Now just watch that, you'll see that water disappear quite quick, opposed to something like this where the water tends to sit on it for a lot longer. So I recommend that you keep the stones in the water while you're working with it. It just makes things a lot easier, although it takes them a lot longer to dry overall. In terms of storage, I forgot to say about the splash and go stone. Silly me. The splash and go stone, you just literally pour a little bit of water on it, you don't have to let it soak. That's the difference. But with these stones, it's a good idea to leave them out for a few hours or even a few days once you're finished, because if you just put them away, I found that they get mouldy. In terms of storage, I just keep mine in a plastic box on a shelf. I've put some holes in it to let it get some air. I don't know if that's helped or not, but they do sort of get mouldy. Not that that's really too much of a problem, just clean it off. So just before I finish this video, I'll just show you that chisel that I was working on today. I think that's quite good. I mean, you can see that's got a nice mirror polish on it. Now, it's not absolutely perfect. You've got a bit of a hollow there and there. So those shinier bits is where the stone has contacted the edge, the surface, sorry. That does not matter, it's absolutely fine. In fact, it just means there's less work, but it'll be just as effective. So of course I've flattened off all this, as well as the bevel, which is nice and sharp, I'm glad to say. That chisel started off looking something like this, which isn't very nice, not very pleasant to work with. You wouldn't get much work done with it. But this, after all that work, should be an excellent woodworking tool now. And it's the same with pocket knives. I sharpen these sort of knives on as well. This one actually needs sharpened, well, polished. I mean, it's still, actually it's alright, it's still nice and sharp, as well as traditional pocket knives. If I can get it open like this. So you can sharpen anything you want on these stones, really. And I'm just going to take a brief moment to shit on those really expensive sharpening systems, because you absolutely do not need them. If you prefer to use it and you can afford it, then fair enough, that's fine. But you really don't need it. Just take the time to do it freehand. It's really easy. And if you really have to get one of those little honing guides, again, fair dues, but it takes no time at all really to learn how to do it by hand. It's a lot quicker and it's a lot cheaper. You really don't need to spend 7, 8, even 1,000 whatever pounds on those expensive sharpening systems when you could just do it just as easily by hand. And those sharpening systems really are just not as versatile. I mean, I don't think you can sharpen axes with them. I think you can sharpen plane irons and chisels, but I mean, all that setup, and it just seems like a lot of nonsense to me. I did kind of like the idea for a while. I guess if you're sharpening things professionally, but I personally don't see the need for them. What I do see a need for is something like a Tormek. That does make sense because it does do it fairly quick, and that's a powered thing. If you're constantly using chisels and knives and axes, that to me makes a bit more sense. I think I'd maybe get one of those someday. Anyway, I've blabbered on long enough. I hope you found that of some interest at least. I personally think this set is fantastic. When I say set, obviously it's 3 different items. Again, those ones at the top, the Flattening Stone and the 8000. And I will in the future look to get higher grits of stone. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments and I'll see you later.